Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Thank you for being with us here on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. You made it to Little Friday. Thank you for being here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can watch us live right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. We've got the studio lit here in Washington and would love to have you along as the candidates head for the swing states. Hey, happy Halloween, by the way. Do you have your reflector vest handy? I had mine ready when I came in earlier today. Of course, that's not why Donald Trump was wearing one last night. Did you see him in the garbage truck? We'll talk about this more as the whole garbage flap continues. Are we going to get 4 days out of this thing? You know it's silly season when stories like these are driving the day, and it has a lot to do with the fact that the polls are tied. Another reason why the candidates are in the swing states today. Out west, at least mostly swing states. Kamala Harris leaving Wisconsin today to go to Phoenix, to be in Reno, right? Arizona, Nevada, swing states. Las Vegas later tonight. Vegas, baby. Donald Trump is strangely in Albuquerque. This is one that has been a bit confounding to people because, well, New Mexico is not a swing state. You could argue that he's appealing to the Latino voting bloc that has been at an issue in this whole conversation about the word garbage. But New Mexico does not appear to be up for grabs. He will, however, be in Henderson, Nevada after that. Tim Walz, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Erie, and Detroit. It's a pretty tight map. That's why we're back in these states every day. And as we look at this nationally, we can get down to the swing states. We do that every day here. 1-point race, 2-point race, depending on where you look. Same story nationally. In fact, it has dwindled to a 1-point race based on research from Ipsos. And as I mentioned, Cliff Young, the president, U.S. Public Affairs at Ipsos, is with us right now in the studio. Cliff, great to see you. 5 days to go. Your phone must be ringing. Right
Stretch run.
Yeah.
Actually, my Fitbit is buzzing right now.
Okay, good. I hope it has good news for you because stress is running high, right? Anxiety is running high because uncertainty is running high. And it's only getting worse. It just couldn't be tighter, could it?
Yeah, what we're telling everyone is that basically it's a 50-50 race. Mm-hmm. We think it's trending a bit Trump, but our level of conviction is very low. That's just a fancy way of saying we don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the conviction aside, you are seeing a tightening and Donald Trump essentially closing the gap that we saw with some of the exuberance following the change at the top of the ticket. Not a surprise, I suspect?
No, we've been seeing this narrowing at the national level over the last couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. We've seen the same in the swing states where he's taken the lead in some of them, where Harris was leading in all of them at one point. We think it comes down to the critical issues. Inflation. Yeah. He's more credible than Harris on that specific issue. That doesn't mean she's necessarily going to lose. Mm-hmm. But I think the narrowing is because of that. A very efficient and efficacious campaign.
Interesting. You wonder if we had different running mates, if we had different opportunities, or if Kamala Harris had a longer run here, if these numbers might look any different. But these are the numbers. This is the race. You find most Americans as well say they are prepared to accept the outcome. That's a really important number here because we've also known that a majority of Americans are pretty worried about violence breaking out around this.
Yeah, I mean, both those ideas are resting in people's minds. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, they say that as Americans say they would accept the results of the race. But if you push them on it, they're very, very worried about the situation post-election.
Yes, right. Tell us what you learned, though. All Americans, 83%. It's a pretty big number.
Yeah, it's a big number. I mean, Americans they believe that there are rules and you have to follow the rules. Mm-hmm. There's rules of conduct, mm-hmm. And that the loser should accept the results. But when you peel that onion away, as I was saying before, there's a lot of trepidation. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of belief that the system is not fair, it's rigged, and it's fraudulent.
I'd like to ask you about methodology because I'm hearing more over the last couple of days that, hey, maybe the sample is broken. We can only do so much based on the electorate that we think we have and the algorithms that we use. How do you treat your polls when you're trying to curve to make up for holes one way or the other in your sample? This is something that every poll does. It's why we have a margin of error, or at least partly right. But how How does it work?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I think there's two principal points that I'd make. The first is it's not just about having a robust sample of the population.
Okay.
It's a robust sample of the population that will vote. And so what we're trying to do is predict who will either show up on Election Day or who will vote early. And that's a tricky issue. That's a challenge that we've always had historically, right? The more recent challenge has been we've missed Trump voters. We underestimated the Trump vote in 2016 by 3 points, in 2020 by 3 points. And the market, including Ipsos, has worked very hard to fill those holes, to try to get at those mega Trump voters that otherwise wouldn't participate in other things, including polls. We've done that both on the design side, trying to find where they are. And there's this, what we call post-survey adjustments. We weight the data, trying to correct for it.
After the red wave did not materialize, did that curve change again? When you look back to the midterms as we got ready for 2024?
We should never use midterms as any sort of leading indicator of anything.
And maybe you don't.
Yeah, we don't. I don't, as analyst and an expert. Midterms are a different beast. So we really have to compare it to 2020, 2016, and question whether our method is a robust method for capturing a population that votes in a general election.
This is really helpful for people because polls are a black box for people in a lot of ways, right? They don't understand necessarily what goes into it because we don't always talk about it. So this is a great opportunity. I've had many people say to me recently as well, or ask me, do you know anyone who's ever been reached by a pollster? And the answer is usually no. Does it matter?
That's a great question, and that's a very logical one. We are a country of 335 million people.
Fair enough.
The probability to fall in any given poll is very, very low. In addition, many of the polls we actually recruit people into a panel, like at Ipsos, and so we go to your door, we knock on the door, we recruit you in, we go to your door, Joe, we say, will you participate in an Ipsos poll? And you say yes. And then we interview you multiple times after that. So, the probability of falling in any given poll is very low. A lot of us are using panels where we're not always going out there into the field. We're re-interviewing individuals that we recruited in. But ultimately, the issue is our focus always is to have a robust sample that's representative of the population. And we use benchmarks like the census, the demographics on the census, to ensure that we're aligned and that our sample is robust.
The cell phone and the internet, not to sound like a really old guy, but I am, changed the game in polling. Is that still evolving? Because I hear, look, there are people who still have landlines. They're getting phone calls from pollsters.
Yeah, it's in flux. Never before has the industry used so many methodologies. Pew Research Center did a study last year that showed that. We're doing it by phone, cell phone, landline, online, recruit to online, which is what Ipsos does. Sometimes we're even knocking on the doors.
And when you say we, Ipsos is doing all of those.
In one way or another, we're doing all those. Maybe not just for our electoral polling, but I'm talking about the industry more generally. Snail mail as well. In 2022, we used snail mail, sending letters out to interview people in the States. And so we're using a whole host of methodologies at this moment of time.
I want to get back to something that you mentioned here in terms of overcorrecting maybe for Donald Trump, the 3-point miss. Nate Silver tweets, both Trump and Harris are a polling error away from a blowout. And he threw a couple of numbers in here. He said, if Harris wins the national popular vote by 4 points, a 2-point error, she's favored for a blowout. Trump, on the other hand, favored for a blowout if he wins by just a half point. Why is that?
That's because those margins really, really matter in those key swing states. I mean, maybe we're talking about 200,000 votes in those 7 states, and ultimately erring 1 point one way or 1 point the other way represents that amount of votes. And so I absolutely agree with him. We think we've corrected things, but we don't know. That's why I'm 50-50 leaning Trump with low levels of conviction.
Is it true, though, that Democrats outperform in the popular vote, so you do need to see a couple of extra points for Kamala Harris than Trump to get the electoral vote?
The rule of thumb is about 3 or 4. There are a lot of people that vote Democratic in California and New York. So ultimately, to take the election, you have to be about 3 or 4 at the national level. That's historical rules of thumb. There's a lot of argument and back and forth and debate whether that relationship still exists today. But I would say any analyst, anyone when looking at the election, should be looking for a 3 or 4 for Harris. She needs that to win.
Yes. Spending time with Cliff Young at Ipsos, is the early vote keeping you up at night? Because we see in some states, it's only, I think, 3 where you get D's and R's, and like, boy, we can actually make some assumptions here on who's pulling ballots. But then I hear, wait a minute, you could have Republican ballots going for Kamala Harris. There's so much noise here, you can't tell.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it as a leading indicator of anything. Every electoral cycle, it suggested something different. I'd be very careful when it comes to that. Really, let's look at the pre-election polling and sit back, take a look on Election Day, and be very careful at looking at the data coming in.
So this is the question everybody wants to ask you, right? When are they going to call this thing? Are you bracing for days or weeks?
If it's as close as we think it is, it'll be longer than days, I believe.
Longer than days, because you need to have Pennsylvania count all these early ballots.
Yeah.
Arizona takes forever.
There might be recounts as well.
Recounts
if it's too close.
Yeah.
And ultimately, my real worry is about confidence in the system. The closer it is, and the longer it takes, the more likely it is for people to not trust the results.
How about that? This is going to be another test for the polling industry. I guess it is every 4 years, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, once again. It's 50-50 leaning Trump with low levels of conviction. There we go.
There's the man. So, everyone's got a gut check. We got Cliff Young's gut check. I'm going to do this every day between now and whenever they call this thing. President, U.S. Public Affairs, Ipsos, doing the good work for us here, and I really appreciate it as always. You've been wonderful through this whole cycle. Let's compare notes next week and see where we're at. Absolutely. Cliff Young, for sure. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, and this is Balance of Power.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
It's pretty much true across the board when you look at national polls, but also when you look at the polls in the battleground states. Right. Almost all of them at this time show a statistical tie.
In our poll, none tighter, as I remember, than Wisconsin.
That's right.
Which was a 0.3 point race. So we'll call that a literal tie, I think, for these purposes. That's why they were both there yesterday.
Yeah, and that's why we add a valuable voice on Wisconsin to our program now. We're joined by Democratic Congresswoman Gwen, who represents the Badger State here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for being with us. It's nice to hear from you again. Could you just give us your real read on how tight Wisconsin is at this time?
Oh, my God. It is so tight. But I am so encouraged by it. It is really, really tight. But I'm really encouraged by what I am seeing visually on the ground, particularly seeing that our 250-person staff here is really getting people out, young people. I'm delighted to see millennials and first-time voters out to vote, and that is very encouraging.
Take us to school on geography, Congresswoman. When we bear down in our coverage on Tuesday night, we're going to be focused on your state like a laser. Where should we be looking as the time zones bring Wisconsin poll closings into the picture?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of people always want to zero in on Milwaukee, where the largest aggregation of African Americans live. And Madison, of course, which is the capital of progressive politics in our state and in our country. But I want to point out to people that Milwaukee and Madison combined, that's only 1/3 of the voters in the entire state. And so that is why I think that the Harris-Walz campaign has gone everywhere. I would really, when I look at Waukesha County, a place that has been ruby red, we have found that every cycle, Democrats have made greater and greater inroads into that community. And as a matter of fact, the mayor of the city of Waukesha endorsed Kamala Harris. And so you better look everywhere. um, I, of course, represent Milwaukee and much of Milwaukee County. So I am laser focused on getting our vote out. And we've had, as of yesterday, we had over 71,000 people voted in the city of Milwaukee. And that's about 1/3 of what we expect. But we are, every single day, we're racking the numbers up.
Well, and that's just a reminder of how many minds, Congresswoman, have already been made up. There may be very few left to change here. I do wonder, though, if you think some minds may have been changed by the comments Donald Trump made in Wisconsin at his rally in Green Bay last night. The suggestion that he will protect women.
Audio.
Congresswoman, can you hear me?
I have lost.
Congresswoman? All right, we'll get back work on that with Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. What I was going to say, Joe, is call attention to the remarks made in Green Bay last night. Brett Favre was there with Donald Trump when he talked about protecting women. This is something we have been hearing more and more from Donald Trump, as he does seem to be trying to reach that group of voters that he is not polling as well with as Harris is. He's polling better with men, of course. He said, I will protect women whether they like it or not. And Congresswoman, if you can hear me now, this language from Trump, whether they like it or not, is that going to change the minds of undecided voters in Wisconsin?
Listen, he's trying you know what, it's really pathetic. Whether we like it or not, we are going to vote him out. I think that we are going to see a gender gap that is widening. Because of his reckless comments and because he's just incredibly unbelievable. It seems to me that, his position on, the father of IVF, he is incredible. He is unbelievable. And we are going to continue to amplify those kind of comments to voters because we are going for every single vote. Donald Trump, of course, is coming to Milwaukee tomorrow, but so is Kamala Harris. And she's bringing the Isley brothers with her, MC Light, Glorilla, Cardi B. And so we are really appealing to everyone. Now, in terms of people who are undecided, I don't believe that there are people who are undecided. I think there are people who love to vote on Election Day. I used to be that person until COVID, that just wanted to wait until Election Day to vote. And those people who have not voted, we are tracking them. We know where people are eligible to vote and are not voting, and we're continuing to call and to knock on doors. We have droves of volunteers that knock on a regular basis and call on a regular basis. We're doing this thing until 1 minute to 8 on Tuesday night.
Well, it seems that somebody's listening on the call when it comes to early voting, Congresswoman. I'm looking at fresh numbers here from Wisconsin that jump off the page. We've seen some first-day records in some important states, but no one expected early voting to top, as you just pointed out, what we experienced in COVID. Enter Wisconsin. With 5 days out, you have already beat the number of in-person absentee ballots cast in 2020. As of this morning, 705, 326 voters have cast the ballots in person. You're going to have an all-time high. What does this suggest to you about the final result?
Well, because people in Wisconsin understand our important role in standing up our democracy. We understand as women the importance of protecting our civil rights. We understand, even as men, targeting men. We understand the importance of protecting workers' rights in terms of protecting Social Security, in terms of protecting pensions, in terms of protecting all of the things that we believe that with Project 2025, that the president will roll back. Reasons that people like Elon Musk, for example, are so involved in the campaign, wanting to destroy payments, for example, salaries for overtime work. And men and women know that there is much at risk.
You'll get your state back maybe in a week, Congresswoman. Good luck with the ads and the speeches, and thank you for being with us. Gwen Moore from the 4th District of Wisconsin. The Congresswoman, of course, has a good chunk of Milwaukee in her district, where we actually had the RNC just a couple of months ago, in what was a very different race then, Kailey.
Yeah, Joe Biden was still
Imagine that.
running back at the RNC.
Hard to remember, actually.
Yeah, and the first attempt on Donald Trump's life had just happened.
With that weekend, yeah.
Pretty incredible few months we've seen on this trail, and pretty incredible to realize that this is all coming to an end in 5 days, or at least we hope in 5 days. It could be, 10, 15.
Couple weeks.
Could stretch out for a little bit longer, but the home stretch is my point.
And there does seem to be consensus. The more voices on this program, we don't know about any undecided voters. I think we're beyond that now. It's about getting people out, and that includes you. You'll help us get there next week with special coverage on election night. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We count down with just 5 days to go until Election Day, and both candidates making their pitches to groups where they are trying to have more strength. For Kamala Harris today, as she crisscrosses Nevada and Arizona, in part that's a focus on Latino voters. The same could be said for Donald Trump, who is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But for Donald Trump as well, it's about courting more women, because Harris consistently has been polling ahead of him in that gender group, while she lags him on men. He's been talking a lot about rallies about protecting women. And as we have mentioned a few times this hour, he talked about protecting women again last night in Wisconsin.
The women of our country. I want to protect the women. Sir, please don't say that. Why? They said we think it's very inappropriate for you to say, so why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
And that is not all Donald Trump said in the rally. In Green Bay. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or YouTube, you see him wearing the reflector safety vest as he was trying to don the outfit of a garbage man, as he put it, following the flap over the use of the word garbage earlier in the week. This is getting to be extensive background here with several turns in this whole controversy. But Donald Trump also told supporters that they're on pace for a runaway victory, barring any fraud. And it brings us back to the preamble here, the pre-buttal, if you will, setting the stage potentially for what Donald Trump could call a rigged election. Having experienced this in 2020, shields are up, and our signature panel is with us. Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg politics contributor, Democratic analyst, political science professor at Iona University, alongside Rick Davis, of course, Bloomberg politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeanne, what's your thought on this? Because people's minds go to the same place. He points to the poly market. He tells supporters that he's leading in the polls when they're, in fact, we've established over the course of this program already, they're dead even. But it helps to set up the narrative for post-election, according to some Democrats. How do you see it?
Yeah, and I think that's the big fear. I mean, we've just heard that Kamala Harris's team has gone and hired Mark Elias. He is a great attorney that helps Democrats in these kinds of challenges. Obviously, the GOP, the Republicans, and the Trump campaign have their own attorneys, because I think we have entered now what we all knew was coming, which is days before the race and in the days after, there's going to be a host of legal challenges. And I think we can see that. And this is nothing new. This sort of, election lawfare, if you will, has been coming since the 2000 campaign. We're 25 years after that. And now we are living in a democracy in which almost every election is being challenged in court. And so it's not the way you want to run an election, but it's where we find ourselves. And I can just tell you, I was talking to young people earlier today. Many of them are concerned about what's going to happen after the election. And they are concerned because, like all of us, they listen to this rhetoric and they hear that people are saying, these things are going to be challenged, and they fear that somebody or some group may take this too far. So I think it could be a fraught few days after this election, and hopefully it doesn't last too long.
So it raises a couple questions for me, Rick. One being, does the electorate, the broad electorate, kind of see through this? Maybe not the most loyal Trump supporters who still believe that he won in 2020, that something was wrong when no court, no factual evidence supports that? Or does it even matter if the electorate sees through it, because it's ultimately going to be decided not by them, but potentially in the courts?
Well, ultimately, it's always the voters who decide who gets counted as a voter. You want to have confidence that all, qualified voters have their votes count on election day. The question is, when is that decision going to be made? I mean, over the last 2 years, there have already been 165 lawsuits that would dictate who those voters are, who's eligible, what the voter rolls look like. And we've heard an onslaught of those things recently. And obviously, post-election, there'll be even more by both parties over one, election irregularities, and two, a lot of activity around vote counting, including what is likely to happen, which is almost every one of these targeted states, these swing states, are within the margin of error, certainly within 1 percentage point. Most of them, the leads are only 1/10 of a point or 2/10 of a point. And those are likely to go to recounts. And each of these 7 states have different recount laws. And each of those have different times that govern how long it takes to recount them. And so we may be sitting through 7 recounts in addition to all the litigation.
Wow. What a thought. We talk so much about the weave. That's Donald Trump, that we do the weave. How about the blur, Jeanne? This lawsuit that was filed in Pennsylvania 2 days ago is important. Donald Trump's campaign suing the Board of Elections in Bucks County because they said people were denied access when they tried to drop off their mail-in ballots. To be clear, they don't do in-person early voting there, but you can drop off your mail-in ballot in person. It got to the point where a judge granted a preliminary injunction and extended the deadline for these ballots. But we have little stories like this cropping up around the country here. And when you put them into the mosaic, the blur, people start to say, hey, this whole system is broken. Isn't that the idea?
It absolutely is. I like the idea of the blur. I don't like the idea, but it's a great descriptor, Joe. And that's precisely what Trump is trying to do. I mean, his argument all along has been, I am going to win. The only reason I won't win is because the other side has stolen this election. And so this is how he does it. He talks about Bucks County, where we know the Bucks County officials on the ground said that was them trying to stick with voting hours, and it was something that the judge rightly extended those days. That should give us sort of a sense of calmness and a sense of, that this system is working the way it should. But that's not how Donald Trump is presenting it. Also, his, talking constantly about Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 2,600 votes, he said, were stolen. Those weren't votes. Those were voter applications, right? He doesn't mention the fact that the GOP just won in the U.S. Supreme Court with the case of the governor of Virginia purging those 1,600 voters from the voter rolls. So there's a lot of litigation out there. He is absolutely trying to do what you call blur this thing. So if he does lose, and it makes you wonder if that's what they're seeing in their internal polls, that he then will come back and say this was stolen. And that is what makes what's happening today and what's happened with Donald Trump so different. We do have a right to challenge elections when we are a part of them. We do have that absolute capacity and legal ability and right. But it is the fact that he will not promise that when this thing is over, he will accept a loss, if that's what indeed occurs, that makes everybody so anxious about this thing.
In addition to all of the legal issues happening around the vote itself, there also was heard in court today arguments in the case surrounding Elon Musk's $1 million sweepstakes to a registered voter. It's now moving to federal court after a state judge heard arguments earlier today. This, of course, is $1 million a day sweepstakes, Rick, that is being led by America PAC, which Musk has funneled millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars into, and also has been charged with a lot of the ground game for Donald Trump. Do we have a sense of how, maybe not the sweepstakes, but how the actual get out the vote effort is going with the fact that it has been outsourced by the Trump campaign?
Yeah, I must admit, I have a particular interest in this. I love the ground game activity. I've been making a lot of calls to Arizona, North Carolina, Nevada, places that I still have some old friends who are in the political game operating. And to an individual, they indicate to me that the biggest disaster of the 2024 campaign is going to be the America PAC, its stewardship of the money that they've received, the conflicting, demands that Elon Musk is making them to do these turnout operations, the lack of coordination that they've had with political groups like the party on the ground in virtually every one of the swing states. So I would be shocked if there's any evidence that the turnout operation is going well in any one state. And I will not be shocked if Donald Trump loses, he blames it on Elon Musk.
Huh. What do you make of that, Jeannie? That's a lot of money to spend to be blamed for an electoral loss.
It is. And just to follow up on that, we heard about some people, some canvassers who said they were put in the back of a pickup truck. They didn't know who they were working for. They were threatened. I mean, it has gotten ugly on the ground. It is a hard thing to do, the ground game, as Rick knows better than anyone. And it takes time and it takes organization. Elon Musk has never exhibited any sense or ability to do this. And so I would say that I agree with the assessment that if this thing goes south for Trump, it's going to be based probably on the ground game.
Well, Elon Musk certainly is one of Trump's loudest surrogates. Jeannie, we just have about 90 seconds left. But if you look at Kamala Harris's prominent surrogates, we talked about Joe Biden's garbage gaffe already this week. There was President Barack Obama, former president, suggesting that black men who don't vote for Harris were doing it because of some kind of sexism or misogyny. Then today, what's making the rounds in conservative circles is Mark Cuban, another powerful surrogate for her, saying that Donald Trump is never around strong, intelligent women. Are the surrogates doing more damage to her than helping her at this point?
Yeah, I think absolutely. In the case of Joe Biden, you hear every Democrat saying, get him in the White House and keep him there and don't let him go before Zoom. And I do think Kamala Harris could have came out tougher on that and distanced herself. It's one of the dangers of working with surrogates. I'm not sure the Mark Cuban statement will have as much traction, but the Joe Biden one definitely didn't help the campaign.
All right, Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, joining us on this Thursday. Thank you so much, as always. And we still have much more ahead on Balance of Power as we talk about the campaign and the ground game, the messaging they are putting out to try to turn voters out in these final days here. A lot of that messaging does also surround policy, for all of the attention paid to some of these more provocative one-liners, if you will. They're still trying to sell their economic policy in particular, and we're going to take a closer look at that and where the economy is.
Yep, absolutely.
Heading into Election Day.
Because this is it. We spent months asking, where will the economy be when people vote? Here we are, and Douglas Holtz-Eakin will join us coming up next on the fastest show in politics. Thanks again to our signature panel. And a lot more to follow here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. Have we mentioned there are 5 days to go? Oh, and happy Halloween. Thanks for being part of the show today. Only on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
This is a big data week. And it matters because, well, presumably some people are still making up their mind on who they want to vote for. Maybe some people could have their minds changed. There's also a little Fed meeting. I hate to remind you here. It's right after the election next week, which makes us wonder as well, Kailey, Leinz, about potential volatility in this market if we don't get an early call.
Well, yeah, there could be major uncertainty around not just who wins the presidency, but who's going to control Congress. And then potentially you add monetary policy uncertainty to all that potential fiscal policy uncertainty. It could be a pretty nasty cocktail, and a reminder that we're all in for it next week. So thank you, Joe. Happy Halloween, everyone. It's spooky out here. As we consider, though, the economic data we got today that could inform that Fed decision next week and inform voters' thoughts on the economy as they head to the ballot box, it's arguably trending in the right direction. PCE, 2.1%. Almost right there exactly at the Federal Reserve's target.
pretty good reading, although a bit below forecast, 2.8% growth on GDP this week. We get jobs data tomorrow. Expected to have the lowest pre-election unemployment rate, Kailey, in 24 years.
So we want to get a picture of all of this and consider the economic policies being put forward still on the campaign trail, because we've gotten some new ones just in the last week or so. Douglas Holtz-Eakin is with us now. He is president at American Action Forum. Welcome back to Balance of Power. Sir, always great to have you. Can you just diagnose where the economy really is right now as Election Day is basically upon us?
Well, I think the starting point is the third quarter GDP numbers, which were quite good. Year over year, 2.7% growth, 2.8 in the third quarter at an annual rate, bolstered by strong household spending and strong government spending. The only, Achilles heel in that report is light on business fixed investment, something I always keep an eye on. But on the whole, a very strong report. And you complement that with a big jump in consumer confidence early in October that suggests that the households are going to continue to be spending their money. You get a jobs report from ADP at 230,000 jobs, another big number in the labor market. And then you get the PCE report, and that's the only thing that makes me, have a little pause, which is core PCE year over year at 2.7 has been stuck there for 4 months. And so if you look at inflation expectations, a year out there, 2.5 to 3, inflation's at 2.5. We've sort of settled into a 2.5% rut. And the question is, will we see continued progress toward 2%, or will the Fed essentially go on hold? But I think the right way to think about it, if you listen to the spooky list that you went through there at the lead into this segment, the economy is not the spooky thing. It's the policy risks that surround it. If you're trying to figure out where you're going, it's all about what will the Fed do, and in particular, what will the candidates do, who will win, and how will the Fed have to react to, for example, a 10% across-the-board tariff. That's hard to game that out.
Does that mean we've got a quarter point in the bag for next week? Douglas, I ask you that because Joe Biden put out a statement on the PCE data. He says inflation has now fallen to 2.1%, nearly at its 2% target, but we have more to do.
Well, I think that, many presidents try to box the Fed in. Good luck with that. They're going to do their job. I was among those who was surprised to see them go 50 basis points and thought that when they did that, they really gave themselves the option to go more slowly later. The day after the election, when it may not even really be settled, and we've seen these recent strong data, it might be a good day to stay on hold. We'll see.
Okay, so that's the monetary policy side of this equation. To get back to the fiscal side, though, which could obviously be dramatically impacted depending on who wins these many races on Tuesday, Douglas, we've heard from Elon Musk and Donald Trump reiterating what Elon Musk said in the last week, that if he is appointed the head of this government efficiency commission or whatever you want to call it, could cut $2 trillion in government spending. Is that really possible?
I will be 6'4" and have a full head of hair before that happens. There's just no way. This is a nice talking point, but who is going to give him that authority? The president doesn't have the authority to give a private citizen an axe and say, go after the federal agencies. The Congress of the United States would have to pass a law that produced a commission that he could lead that had those authorities. And that is never going to happen. They created the programs that he's talking about cutting out. They put in place the personnel that he's talking about axing out. No, this is campaign talk that should be interpreted as no more than campaign talk.
Well, considering your former life at CBO, we thought maybe you could score this idea, because Elon Musk told people in the crowd yesterday, why, if you're laughing, that's not a good sign, because Elon Musk says we're going to be in for some pain. Douglas, what's it going to feel like?
So if suppose you just did the exercise where you had a commission that could recommend things, they would have to recommend the near elimination of half the government in order to reach that $2 trillion target. They've taken off limits, Social Security, Medicare. Remember, the candidate Trump has said he's not touching those. Those are, by themselves, over half of non-interest spending over the next 10 years. So you got to take on the other half of the government and decimate it. I think some Republicans are going to want to hold on to the Defense Department. I'm just guessing. And, it seems unlikely that you could get anything through Congress to enact this commission's proposals. So I'm now officially old. I remember the Grace Commission. I remember the great claims that were going to be made about how it changed the trajectory of the federal bureaucracy forever. And as I sit here in 2024, it doesn't look like it did much, and this won't either.
Well, if we're just still gaming out like the hypothetical math here, even if you were to do all of that, could you pay for the tax cuts Donald Trump has put forward, the very long list of
No.
the tax either cuts or breaks, even if you were to do all of that, get rid of the Defense Department or what have you?
Look, there is so little specificity, and there's one that happens every day. I don't know what he's proposed today. I'm not sure we're going to have a tax base by Tuesday. He has given away the store on a daily basis. So, it's nothing like a sound tax policy platform. He wants to simultaneously extend the 27 Act or the 17 Act and do a bunch of other things. They're going to have to step back and restart. And I guess, I understand campaigns. I've been on a campaign. I understand the politics of trying to collect votes as you go to the finish line. But it's important to recognize that he wants to get a deal on 17. That would be his signature accomplishment. Did it in his first term, renewed it in his second term. Every time he makes a proposal, let's not tax overtime, let's not tax, let's get rid of the SALT cap, he creates a constituency that makes it harder to extend that, makes it harder to renew it.
Yep.
And so he is working at odds with what he needs next year.
It is true. The appropriations folks that we talk to are getting some anxiety every time Donald Trump announces another exemption at the podium here. Kamala Harris has had her share of them as well, Douglas. And as a creature of Washington, you know what the conventional wisdom is. The House, they say, will turn Democratic. The Senate will turn Republican. In that world, neither of them likely get any of their proposals passed, right?
I think the new proposals, so, the Harris proposals on taxing capital gains and the like, they're non-starters in that world. I think the Trump proposals are the same way. My concern is they will revert to form and just buy each other off, and we'll do the extended spending that the Democrats want. We'll extend all the tax cuts without paying for them, and we'll be in a fiscal mess. And so that's really worth looking out for.
My God. Well, that is
I'm
a
a cheery guy to
distinct
have
reality.
on Halloween, right?
Well,
this has been fun.
You want to one up us on spooky?
Honestly,
I think you won, Douglas.
No, but honestly, one of the things to watch for is when really pressed for time, and it's going to be tight next year. They got a lot going on, and not knowing really what to do, they revert to form and do what they did before, and they have done that before, so they could easily kick the whole decision out 2 years and try again.
Path of least resistance. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, great to see you. As always, thanks for joining us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. We always have good conversations with Douglas because he can speak freely now that he's not running the CBO. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.